Hi, welcome to Firth and Friends. This is John Firth, and I'm here with my friend and former client, Tony Seamus. And we are talking about a very popular topic. And by the way, Tony, we had probably more registrants for this LinkedIn Live than any I've done before. It was over 70 when I last looked. So this is obviously a really hot topic. And usually most of the registrants come from the interviewees network or also my network. There are a lot of people there that look like they weren't part of your network and certainly weren't part of mine. So it means the word is getting out. This is an important subject. So those of you who've been following my LinkedIn Lives know me. I'd like to ask Tony to introduce himself and ask the question, the very first question I had when Tony and I discussed this, which is, what exactly do we mean by product market fit? Sounds a little bit like a plug and play idea where you have the outlet and you have the plug and if you can get it in there somehow, you have product market fit. But we know it's much more complex than that. So let's start there.
Sure. Thank you, John. I am Tony Seamus. I've been in B2B industrials for 20 years. I have a technical and business background, chemical degree in marketing and finance MBA. But now I run a firm of partners, and we help B2B industrial companies untangle sales and marketing issues before they dump more money and resources towards it.
Excellent. And there's a lot of money that goes needlessly into marketing and social media initiatives. So that's probably one reason why you're doing so well. So what is product market fit? How would you define it?
You know, I would define it as I think you posted a great comment earlier on LinkedIn about it, but it's all about, do you have the right product for the right market? You can make a wonderful product and it can solve a problem, but it might not be just for that specific market, or it might not be for those customers, or it just might not be a problem yet. I met last week the guy who developed a super concentrated ingredient for soaps, and you can just take an ounce of soap and then add the water in when you get home, and you save a significant amount in shipping. When he invented it like 10 years or developed it and launched it 10, 15 years ago, wasn't an issue. Now on Amazon charges you a significant amount, like $8 to deliver a gallon of soap. So
interesting.
Now it's a problem.
Yeah, and timing is everything, as I constantly am reminded. In any case, this takes us to our first section, which is the ideation part. And this is, people say that it's on the execution. Well, unfortunately, now it's gotten to the point I'm discovering where people take the first good idea that they think they found, and they say, well, we'll execute the hell out of that. Well, what they don't realize, at least in my experience, is the ideation is still very important. Because that's when you put the first stakes in the ground, and the first stakes in the ground are a mile off. Doesn't matter how well you execute it, you're going to find yourself banging your head against the wall. So let's talk a little bit about the ideation part. And it's first of all, I would say it's very chaotic from my experience. There's so many uncertainties and doubts. But in addition to the timing question, I was just talking to one of my clients where we had a member of this group I run of business owners who there was a member who was a little ahead of his time, a little bit on the bleeding edge. He finally got it when a member of his investor group pushed the envelope. He was a new investor and said, I need to see the strategy. And then this client of mine spent good 2 months crafting the strategy. And that was the first time I think anybody truly understood what the market he was going after, what it was he was going to use to do that, and what parts of the value creation chain was he going to hold. For example, the system, software system for this he was going to hold, but all the hardware he was going to outsource. So let's talk a little bit about ideation in your experience.
Well, ideation in my experience is a group of people, either in a room or globally, staring at each other blankly, trying to fill out a blank form. We got to come up with ideas.
That's good. Right.
So I think from those experiences, what I've learned and what I do with my clients now that I found super helpful is to create a framework, the McKinsey 7 or the STAR method, something to get people's minds, product technology, something to think about. What am I solving? What could I be solving around my customers, my business? and that helps people to not go in and just stare at a blank page. So
Yeah.
just the infancy of ideation, right? Um, and then once you have something, people in Silicon Valley like to say fail fast, but I think in the real world in business where we have to get revenue fast, we
Yeah.
don't
Or
we
at
don't
least
know
have
how to do
some
that.
sort of, you got to have money somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't know, you don't have that you don't have that concept really like nailed down where you can fail fast. You know how to do it. And I
Right.
think that's kind of what you were describing. You put your stakes in the ground and people say, I've got a great idea. And then it doesn't get there. It doesn't get you the sales that you wanted and that type of thing. So, but people in business just keep pushing. So what do you do to prevent that? Right. And I
Yeah.
think in that ideation, it's a business case and a business plan, which sounds so straightforward and obvious, but
Yeah, parochial, yeah, somehow.
so many people miss that, and it's about banging up your idea before you put it out and validating it and validating your hypothesis, making it, you know what, I think this product is going to be great for this market for these reasons, and it's going to make this much money. Great, develop the product. Okay, we've got a little prototype. Now let's go and validate those principles again. Go back out and do primary or secondary research, talk to people, find it written somewhere that valid, not just Google, but you can find it. Google will tell you everything's right, but find somewhere scholarly
Right.
that says this is a real fit and need, and talk to market experts, customers, potential customers, and validate it with them as well.
Right. So you brought up an interesting topic when we were talking a few days ago, which is the problem with bias. And I gave you an example just now of a client of mine who it's a product that would help blue collar workers find work. That's all I really think I can say. And he went to some trade associations of the big industries that depend on blue collar workers to be able to perform their work. And he went to one trade association and they loved it. They were all over it, but they said, you really should stick to our industry vertical. And it has to be verticalized. Otherwise, we won't be interested. And I reminded him that that was a trade association. I ran the trade association for the consultants. So the only thing that I cared about was working with people who were going to help consultants. So of course, any idea that came my way that sounded like it would support consultants in the consulting industry, I was all for. And I wouldn't say I was being brain dead, but that was my mission. The more I proved value to the industry, the more members I would get. The more members I get, the bigger the revenue pot was to work with and so forth. So talk a little bit about bias and how one can maybe strip out bias when one is already, it's getting more and more attached to a particular idea. And then you have this issue where maybe they just stop listening to any negative thoughts because they're so bought in.
Right. There's a lot to unpack there. But in essence, if you ask somebody if they think it's a good idea and they know you, they're going to be supportive and tell you, even if it's a horrible idea. So try to have that 5 whys conversation with them. Why do you think this is a good idea? Why do you say that? Tell me more, and articulate to them that it's a safe space. That's one of the benefits of hiring consultants. You don't always have money to hire a consultant, right? But it's a
Right.
third party non-biased person asking those questions. People, your friends, your customers, they'll tend to be more honest with that person because they don't want to shake the relationship they have with you. Yeah, even if they're very close.
And they really have nothing to gain by being negative, quite honestly. Because first of all, probably most people you talk to, this is the first time they've heard that idea. And second of all, they don't know if that idea is actually good or bad. I think for the most part, Joe Average doesn't really know. I mean, we've got so many examples of private equity firms, venture capital firms that miss the boat on LinkedIn, miss the boat on Facebook, and so forth. So I think people are just hesitant to be negative because we don't like that in our society. But also, it's hard to be negative when you don't really understand what you're hearing, per se, and you can't foretell the future.
You know what, though? You also brought up another point that I want to point out is it's like a founder's bias and a problem when you bring a product to market and you talk to a certain company and they ask you to tweak it a little bit. You're like, and this happens in the software and industry all the time. Tweak this a little bit and it'll be perfect for us. And then you've got big sales with many big companies, big brand names, and you go to try to sell your business and nobody wants to buy it because what you don't have a product, you have a customized shop that's making customized products for these big companies.
Very good point. Very good point.
It's different. You're not selling a product anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. You and I sort of prepared the format for this, but we're going in all sorts of very interesting directions. I asked one of my clients this morning who is it sold his company, is looking to jump on board with another company that needs a senior executive. And so the example I just gave of blue collar workers, there are a bunch of people swirling around the concept. There's really no structure. So I asked him, what I'm going to ask you is, how does one make decisions? And what are the key decisions that one will make, or a group of people, to make that really, in some cases, very difficult, in some cases, very easy answer, which is, what do we do next? What is the product? What are we selling, whether it's a product or a service? What are some of the key decisions, and how does one usually make them?
I mean, a number of ways to skin this apple for certain. Lots of decision-making frameworks out there that help you to look at different products and identify the attractiveness of them. So that's one way. You can use like a modified BCG matrix to say, this is a big market, there's a lot of money there, it's profitable, it's attractive to us for these reasons, let's go after it. And then there's this business case, kind of financial business case exercise that I found even big companies don't always go through, or have a very complex net present value complication that nobody understands. But at the end of the day, it's how much money do I need to make in 5 years, or do I want to make in 5 years? And if I back myself from there, if I sell this product, is it reasonable that I would hit that target? And if I sell it in this way to these markets at these prices, and just do some back of the envelope on it and say, does this financially work?
Yeah, and I should say there are probably two or three different kinds of ideators, potential founders, if you will. There's the young person right out of college with a degree in software engineering or something. And, when it comes to business, they're probably savvy, but they don't know a lot. So experience, that intuition that one who's in their 40s or 50s who've been through it can probably tap into much easier. Then you've got the person or the company that's got 3 or 4 products already out. They've been through it, so they sort of know the hallmarks. And for them, they can rely on a lot of experience, but that can also be a potential landmine because you're dealing with former experiences. And if you're trying to be cutting edge or bring innovation to the market, a lot of that experience can actually hamper you. There's a reason why Jeff Bezos was so successful with Amazon, because he had never sold books before or anything. So he came with a totally fresh mind. And then I think there's the other one where more or less what I deal with is small, medium-sized businesses that have maybe one product on the market and they want to grow, and they're discovering that one product is beginning to level out. It's becoming a cash cow, if you will. And then they start having to develop ideas. And then the question is, what becomes the idea that they're going to invest in? So each one has a different way of making decisions, either with experience or without. But you've made a very important point that if for some reason you are new to a market, or you are having to create something, let's say out of scratch, best thing to do is to talk to people. We've already talked about the biases in talking to people. But what I've learned, for example, is that you have to be careful of who the experts are that you talk to. I still think user groups and you getting the user feedback, certainly when it comes to technology apps, is probably the most valuable, but maybe you see it differently in terms of the kind of expertise you actually need.
Yeah, that's a super good point. I mean, choosing the expert is something that I've almost taken for granted, to be honest with you. An executive asked me in December, how do you choose an expert? And I said, you just go to GLG or one of these companies and ask them to find experts for you. Right. And I realized it is a little bit more complicated to do that effectively, because you have to kind of understand the market and understand the process by which you ask qualifying questions to these folks. So you need to do a little bit of market research and understanding of the market and grounding. So talk to people in your company, if you're not in your company, that are already doing it in different companies, and triangulate the person to talk to. And I also start with an interview guide, right? Here are the questions I want answered. I almost never go through the entire thing with one person, but it's
Yep.
added
When I was a consultant, yeah, exactly.
for each one.
Right.
So that's another. If you're just asking the same questions to everybody, that's not the best use of the time. I think it's more of, okay, let me get the grounding first. Let me understand and talk to the next person and make sure that I'm pressure testing all of those hypotheses, the persons that I thought, the things that I heard.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. You touched on it, but I want to bring it up. The question of the ecosystem in which you're working. I had yesterday a conversation with two gentlemen, both of whom are clients, about this referral platform. How you're going to be able to track referrals, make referrals, and compare and contrast how you're doing. That's really all I can say about it. But it is a question of how you define the ecosystem. So if you take the real estate industry, it's more than just brokers. It's brokers, but then it's also mortgage lenders. It's also carpenters, general contractors. The real estate industry is more than just the brokers. So you have to define what the ecosystem is that you are going to work within. I point that out in my book, which is about disruptive leadership, is that everything has an ecosystem. And obviously, the larger, the more involved the ecosystem around an industry, and the more they get somehow tied to this, the larger the potential market is for whatever you're developing as a theoretical concept. So how does one go about defining the audience, the buyers?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there too, but I want to point out with the ecosystem, I think the way to visualize it is that if you change something within the ecosystem, it's going to fight back. I was a product manager for 4 years for IoT SaaS product that pulled data out of manufacturing plants and then provided insights and value. And it reduced the amount of time people spent trying to find issues by, I don't know, let's say 80%. And that extra savings of time, it was maintained at trying to find issues rather than reallocating it towards some sort of higher value activity. And the reason was the people at the manufacturing plants expected to see the person who was previously doing this now digital work physically doing stuff. So it didn't matter that you saved all this time because the manager of that person, the clients, the customer, everybody wanted to see the ecosystem around this person that you've kind of made more efficient is forcing them to be less efficient. So the value tends to fade away. But you asked about audiences, right?
No, there's a lot of change management that goes. Anything new in an industrial setting or even consumer setting, there's always a hiccup there where people have to get used to it and adapt to it. Now, this brings me to one final point, and then we're going to move into the next two parts, which is the question of value. Where do people see value? And there are two things that I've learned always create value, and it's the basis of all disruption, which is you make it cheaper and you're able to distribute it much more broadly. I always use the example of penicillin when it came out. It was very high end. They didn't know how to, they hadn't figured out the batch processing, the fermentation process to make it a mass product, but it was clearly an important product because of what it was able to do in terms of taking care of all sorts of infections and so forth. It wasn't until World War II when they were forced to be able to manufacture huge amounts of it because of the war effort and the soldiers that they figured out batch processing and therefore turned what was a luxury product, quote unquote, into something that could be mass distributed and done much cheaper. So those are two watchwords. If you can take something and make it cheaper and find a way to Henry Ford it with an assembly line so that you can just manufacture it, whatever it is we're talking about, then that's a good sign that you may be doing something. So there is the innovation of disruptive innovation, which is when you take a product that exists, but it's very high end and only a few can afford it and make it much less, make it more affordable and more highly distributed.
Yeah.
I guess that's an observation, but also I guess a question to you, are there any rules of thumb like that you would say to help guide people?
Well, yeah, I think what I'm thinking when you're saying all of that is pricing strategy, and you've got cost strategy there too, right? Your margins and your positioning from a luxury product to more of a commodity available for all. you're getting more dollars, but less margin, and you're able to produce it less. I don't know, need charts to show all this, right? But at the end of the day, I think simplified pricing strategy and trying to understand, am I a price leader or am I a price follower? Am I setting the price in the market for the products, or am I supposed to be following and matching where people are? Or and if I'm a price leader, am I doing a cost-based pricing or am I doing value-based pricing?
Right.
So I think those concepts and being aware of those concepts, value-based pricing and cost-based pricing and price follower, price leader, commodity, specialty, thinking about those words and trying to triangulate where your product is and then apply the right pricing strategy to it.
Well, which actually brings us to the second part of our conversation, which is the whole planning aspect of it. First, I just want to let people know you're watching Tony Simas. I'm talking to Tony Simas about a great topic, finding that elusive product market fit. And we've just been talking about ideation and sort of the chaos of ideation. And we've hopefully given you a little bit of sense of some of the questions you have to ask and some of the process you go through to actually come up with a new product or a service, whether you're an entrepreneur of 21 years old or you're a seasoned business owner. Often the process looks the same. It can be shorter, obviously, the more experienced you are. But let's talk about planning. You talked about cost and pricing. One of the things I find people get really hung up about is that moment when you actually have to come up with how you're going to make money, the monetization of it. Yeah. And what I've seen, one of the experiences that I've had is that founders, when you've got the product, you somehow suddenly lock yourself into a belief about the way it's supposed to be. Technology suddenly all becomes about the silver, gold, and platinum levels, and what are you going to charge for them? And they forget that there are sponsorships available to them. I'm talking about a technology platform. There are ways of selling real estate on the website for interested parties. There's more than just what am I going to price it for the consumer uptake or for the user uptake. But let's continue this conversation. How does one plan out the product now? What are all the different elements that you should be looking at?
Yes, speaking about the planning, it just made me think about the go-to-market strategy that I use, and maybe it's a good time to introduce it really quickly because
sure.
I think you have a slew of people who say, I'll help you with your go-to-market strategy. And I've always found that 9 times out of 10, the people who are saying that are specialists in one area, especially in marketing. Yep. You say, I'm a marketing agency, and then you unpack it a little bit, and they're SEO specialists, copywriters. And so all of those different marketing functions fit in along the path, and we've kind of talked about it. But the way that I look at the go-to-market process is 4 steps: learn, plan, build, execute. So that ideation phase is about learning, understanding the product, the market fit, the positioning, the value proposition, and then pressure testing it, right, with primary and secondary research. Right. And then we get to the planning, right? What am I going to charge for it? What's the pricing strategy? Now that I've got all that information, where the planning is all in, what is my market entry strategy? How am I going to communicate and get myself in front of the proper market? Who are how am I going to sell to that market? What do I need in order to get that done?
Both in terms of personnel and finance. I think another experience I've seen is that people get started, there's a lot of excitement, and they're too optimistic about cash flow, too optimistic about revenue. And a year or 2 years goes by and money's almost out. And they haven't, or they're unwilling often to go out and raise capital. There's a lot of fear around raising capital, but I would say part of the planning is asking yourself the hard question of, what if this doesn't work out the way we're thinking about it? At what point will we have to call it quits? And at what point are we going to have to call it quits simply because we run out of cash or capital? Yeah. What's been your experience at this point where the money question? How do people usually handle that?
Well,
it's a tough one.
A lot to unpack there too, right? I mean, in your business case, ideally, you've thought about how many consumers are there for your product, and working back from that long-term goal, how are you making sure that you're hitting major milestones to get there and it makes sense? And if you're not hitting those, how are you taking that KPI of sales in 6 months or a year or 2 years, how do you dial that back to the activities that you're doing? And are you able to change and adjust those activities or those assumptions that you made?
That's where agility comes in, and resilience, but agility to be able to look at something and say, we got to pivot.
Yeah.
But I do people, when you're working with companies and innovators, at what point does it become clear that, I'm thinking specifically also because of skill sets, if you will, or perceived skill sets. So you're ideating, you're a very creative guy, and very often the creative guys aren't very good at execution. So if you're a founder, you really got to be able to dance on many weddings, if you will, because the capital raise is a completely different skill set than ideating a great, coming up with a great idea, as it is going to be a completely different skill set to execute and to actually get the thing into the market. So how does one deal with that? The obvious way, the people I've seen have been successful, they immediately start saying, what resources in terms of human resources will I need? Because I've never done that before, or I'm comfortable, or that's not really something I'm very good at, when they're being honest. But that also costs money. I keep coming back to the money thing because that, at least in my experience, is often the difference between success and non-success. It's the capitalization.
It is too, but I also find that if you tie money to human-centric goals, so things that people within your team care about, what your customer cares about, if you're truly deeply focused about those things, I found that those are the founders that, when I look at folks who are just running around the world and growing their business, that's what they're passionate about, the customers and solving that problem. And they get energized from when they get the aha moments from their customers and get a purchase, right? And they're not chasing the money. Although, again, you've got to be there has to be a regular eye on the money. But that's
right.
a major challenge, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's a chicken and egg problem, which is, do I hire an investment? Often the answer is hire a very good investment banker, but that only becomes relevant or even possible above a certain amount. Like even now, $5 million is a minimal raise. Most investment bankers aren't really that interested. It sort of starts at 25 million. So, the thing that at least the group of entrepreneurs I work with come up with is a friends and family round. But, to get your first $200,000, so you're at least got some money to fall back on. And then after that comes the seed money, which is sort of a combination of friends and family or wealthier friends and family and potential investors. Really becomes an issue when you're going out after venture capital or PE money. And there you gotta have a significant ask. Just $1 million or $2 million isn't going to, nobody's going to really work with you to help you find that money. And that's, of course, you've got in one of my cases, one of my clients, an excellent chairman of the board, but he had purchased a concept that was already out there and he's going to expand it. So it's slightly different.
Yeah.
But
even an angel investor, they want to see some significant sales already. Right. And
right.
to that point of that founder problem I mentioned, where you're customizing it for everybody, a lot of angel investors, especially VC, are going to see right through that. And, okay, you don't have a single product that you're selling over and over again. So yeah, that's and
it's interesting.
You're afraid of losing equity too, right?
Right. So what's interesting is the number of times that somebody tries to sell me their concept as being bespoke. We can customize it for anyone. And talking to you, I realize that that's just an excuse for often not making a final decision of what are the features, what's the strategy, what features come in when. One of the entrepreneurs I work with now has finished up one business and is going on to his next one, completely different business. And we spent a lot of time planning out. He's got a whole bunch of ideas. He's great at ideation. He's also very good in execution, but the rubber is really hitting the road now. Is what are the feature sets that are going to come in a year, in 2 years, maybe even in 5 years, but not now. And I think that's a huge part of the planning, is admitting to yourself there's just so much you can do with so much capital that you have, with the resources that you have. And there's some things, as much as you'd like to do them and as much as they may ultimately be worth the investment, you just can't do everything at once. I think that's the sort of decision making that goes on in planning.
I think
I
a
don't know.
concept that, yeah, I mean, a concept that one of my mentors taught me was always, for a founder, always have an exit plan. So a lot of founders start businesses and think they're going to be the Steve Jobs or turn it into Microsoft, right? And you've got to set yourself up to sell to one of those companies, not try to compete with them or be bigger. If you want recurring revenue forever, buy Dunkin' Donuts.
No. You know what? That's a great point, because I usually in the conversation early on, I say, well, what is your exit strategy? I get blank stares pretty much all the time. Or I get something like, well, I'm not planning to sell it. This is going to be one of those things I'm going to ride out for the rest of my life. And I'm like, that's not a plan. That's a hope. Hope it's not a strategy. What is the exit strategy? How are you going to make money? I would say out of all the entrepreneurs I've worked with, maybe two of them had exit strategies, and both were very successful by having that. I would say having the exit strategy in mind. And it doesn't have to be in 3 years. I mean, it can be, in 10 years. It could be, well, I have children now, and my hope is one of them is going to take over. It's a little more concrete than I'm just going to hold it for the rest of my life. We'll see what happens. That's not a strategy.
Yeah. It'll lead to that.
Good.
Yeah.
So we've got only about 10 minutes time left. I haven't been looking at the comments, so I'm going to look now. We don't have any. Please, anybody who's listening, if you have anything you want to say or ask, please go ahead. There's a comment box there. And I'm here with Tony Simas, and we're talking about that evergreen topic, finding that elusive product market fit. And I hope people are coming away with what I'm hoping they'll come away with. I just said that twice. That this is a much more complicated question and process than just simply taking what I call the outlet and the plug and finding some way to plug the two in together. But now let's go into execution phase. You've done this plan, you have a business plan, you've got even an investor deck that's helped you sort through the issues. What happens next, or what can happen?
I mean, all kinds of things, right? I think we said it earlier. You get out there and you were wrong.
Right.
I think it's interesting because we're talking about the ideal state of doing all of these, like learn, plan, build, execute, and so many people don't do it. I gave a talk last week and on how do you go from an idea to delivering the value of that idea by driving adoption in a company, and I said, this is the leading way to do it. And everybody came back to me afterwards and said, well, we've already failed. What do we do to get restarted, right? So I think maybe it's important to think about an execution. Like, what do you do when you fail or you didn't meet your goals and targets, right? Let's be real. I mean, in execution, the ideal state, you're hitting your KPIs. You've got OKRs that you're working on. And those
if we even have those. I mean, again, if we've got a 21 or 22-year-old, chances are they don't even know what a KPI is. So there's also a question in my mind of whether or not a founder, or even if the founder has given up and handed it to a hired CEO, if you will, if they even have those in place. But let's just assume people have milestones, they planned for them, and they're missing them. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that. So then, like, I gave this example last week. I've been in meetings where an executive has put up on the board a scorecard, a dashboard of KPIs, red, yellow, green. And he's, hey, we need to tighten up here. We need to do better here. We're doing okay here, but let's keep going. Right. And I remember sitting in a room of 150, 400 people online too. And I was responsible for over $100 million of that business that person was talking about. And I didn't know how my activities led into that. I mean, I intrinsically had activities and I was driving growth, but I didn't, see the direct feedback. And my recommendation is, if you are failing and you're not hitting your KPIs, open up the hood on those KPIs and think about what needs to be true in order for you to hit those KPIs. What things need to occur in order for you to get that KPI, and then work backwards from there. What actions do you need to take to make those things occur? And that's in essence what an OKR is. It's an objective and key result. What is your objective that's going to hit your KPI? Or what is the key result that's going to hit your KPI? And what objectives are you doing to hit that key result? And I think that will enable you to have a practical way to think back to your strategy and figure it out. So I'd set up OKRs.
And so as usual, I'm going to make the muddy waters even muddier. which is maybe you have the wrong KPIs. Maybe you set them too aggressively. Let's just say a revenue target or a user target. And almost everyone I've worked with who has those sort of targets comes in underneath what they planned. And then I think you're dealing with, and again, I'm giving really the example of the small and medium-sized businesses, not the large corporations. Then now you're dealing with fears and anxieties that can begin to cloud somebody's mind and lock them into, entrench themselves. I think of that woman at Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, I think, who at some point got so tunnel visioned on, first of all, a product whose idea was wrong. And it's almost an example of aviation gone wrong. But then she so locked herself into it obsessively. And, I don't know her, and certainly what you hear in the media is probably only half the truth. But I can imagine there was a lot of fear and anxiety, whether she was conscious or not. And then she just became fixated, because a lot of people believe that if you want it badly enough and you work hard enough, it'll happen. I get a lot of that too. If I just buckle down and make this work, and I work 70 hours a day, and I'll get it to work. And unfortunately, that's generally a sign that you have a problem, a big problem, and generally can be you is the problem, as it was with Elizabeth Holmes. I mean, she had all the people around her, whistleblowers and so forth, trying to tell her, and she wouldn't listen.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good place for a diagnostics of your business, right? I didn't hit my targets. Do I have the right product? Do I have the right product market fit? Did I do all of the unbiased, primary and secondary research? Is my positioning correct? My value proposition, does it make sense to people? Within the market. I ran into this personally with my business. I've gone through a journey of starting out telling people I'm a strategy consultant. And if you asked me 5 years ago what I did, I'd say that. And then when I started my own practice, people were like, what is strategy? What do you mean? What do you do? And then I went to marketing, and I said, oh, I'm a marketing consultant. I'm like, well, you make billboards? I don't understand. What do you do? I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, I remember that. That's the group who's over 50. That's when you were part of us, and we were trying to guide you through that. And you were very good at listening, and you found your product market fit. I'm assuming at this point that's why we're doing this. But yeah, there was a time about this time last year where I think we were all wondering exactly where you were going to land and how we were going to get you there when we ourselves weren't entirely sure. That's the time when you just have to listen and see if you can give some guidance. So how did you, in the middle of executing, having to make money, how did you then pivot or finally get to where you are now?
You know what? I read some good books, Scaling Up and David A. Field's book on consulting, and was able to build out a better strategy on a page from Scaling Up and understand my value proposition and positioning. Frankly, none of my products or services changed. I still kept them all. But now when I tell somebody that I untangle sales and marketing issues before you invest too much time and money, people's heads, they're like, oh my gosh, wow, that's great. Like, I need that. And it's a simple, explanation of what it is. And then, I talked to the CTO of a major company last week, and I said that to him, and he goes, oh, you're a strategy consultant. And I'm like,
you've done.
Yeah, but
you let out of jail sort of card.
Exactly. So here we are. I think that's something that you can, and a way to diagnose your business is go to, groups like yours, John, and get that feedback and understanding, and then research and figure out that value proposition and positioning.
And that's where one has to assume you have the product. So this is, I guess, a great way to end the session that we're having right now, is to say that if you have the product and it delivers on a value proposition, then the question becomes, is it priced right? Are you promoting it right? In other words, do you have that secret sauce that will engage people? And there's a whole bunch of thinking around that. As a coach, I have spent, and even executives over 50, we're doing a rethink now of both the business model and how we promote it. In fact, we're using ChatGPT to come up with a new mission statement and new feature sets. So we're not paying for a coach or a consultant, but we're paying, I guess, nothing for ChatGPT. And it is kind of helping us. I suppose I should make a plug for AI. It is amazing how ChatGPT is acting as the sort of objectifier, taking away from us so we can see it out there and have it feed back to us things. It allows us to make some decisions. It's actually really facilitating decisions. But in a services world, it often comes down to small little things like the words you use, how you engage someone, and how, they say, I deal with this every week when I plan out a LinkedIn Live and have to do the promo. What is that title and what is the subject line of the email that's going to grab people? Be provocative and thought-provoking enough so that they are interested, but one, not give the answer away, and second of all, not appear like you're selling snake oil. I mean, it's a very fine line between being provocative and thought-provoking and being silly or stupid or appearing like a con man.
Yeah. If we have time, we just got a question.
Yeah, sure.
Jared asks here, when you're planning for 1 to 5 years, it makes sense. But what happens with the fast changing markets, right? There's so much uncertainty with tariffs are a problem. This is a problem. That's a problem all the time, right? And that's an excellent pitch for business continuity planning, disruptor planning. And that's how you do it. You plan for that kind of situation. I remember the December before the pandemic, I was doing a business continuity project and we asked 150 questions. Here are all the things that could potentially go wrong. And I swear pandemic was on it and everybody in the call laughed. Pandemic? What is this, a movie? And then literally 2 months later, we're all working from home. So that's how you plan for disruption. And in this environment with so much disruption, we should be planning for it. When you do your modified BCG matrix of attractiveness, you can actually plug that in there. Are we going to have a recession, or are we going to have a turn up in the economy? And how does that change your prioritization going forward? So there's all kinds of
and again, it comes to agility. I often think that you talk about the BCG model. I use that in many. It's one of those ones. I have a couple of tools and techniques that can fit many situations. Yeah. But at the end of the day, you need to be monitoring the marketplace. And what does that mean? Well, you've got to be aware. I think one of the key moments for a number of my clients when they were finalizing their planning was to look at the competitors, what they would call competitors. And there's always a rude awakening when you suddenly realize, oh, look what Google's bringing out. Oh, well, this company just got a $20 million funding. And we don't have that funding. And you got to be watching the market. At that point, you have to be aware of what's going on because a potential disruptor could come in very quickly, change everything, or you could end up, if timing's everything. If you hit a road bump and you don't get through it quickly and you're, say, 6 months behind plan or a year behind plan, there's somebody else who may be faster than you to market and may be able to roll up the sidewalk. Now, with small firms, that doesn't often happen because they tend to choose sort of, in many cases, markets that are sort of starting to form or aren't really quite there yet. But there's lots of examples of where I go, what, guy, if you take another year to get to where you should be, I can guarantee you the market's not going to be what it was and you're going to waste time and you're going to have nothing to show for it. So I hope that answers the question, but I think I always talk to people about what are your competitors doing? Who are your competitors and how do they stack up? And it's always a very worthwhile conversation. And the thing about tariffs, for example, all my guys who were importing products all started talking to their suppliers, see if they could work something out. The government's doing what the government does. At some point, this whole topic of conversation, maybe yesterday, then all those conversations you had, while they're important and good to be able to talk to your suppliers, may at the end of the day have really been pointless because the tariffs may get dropped. They may just be eliminated. There's a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of friction that happens that you ask yourself, why did we spend so much time on that? Well, you didn't really have a choice because you didn't know. And it's good that you did that. Taking action, any action, is often far better than taking no action. But there are times when no action is good. That's one of the things I've learned as I got getting older under the heading of timing is everything. There are times where if I pause for a couple of days or a week or two, it sorts itself out. But that's really, I think, from experience. I doubt that people wake up one day at the age of 22 and get the timing thing. And I mean micro timing. But
Right.
often waiting is a good thing. But often if you don't, and then there are other times where if you don't take action, you can forget it. And that's, I don't even know how to even begin to explain that to somebody who hasn't been through it. I don't know how aware you are of those sort of things.
Well, the way I look at it is I look at my stock portfolio and call my broker when I know something's going to happen. Like when Trump announced the tariffs, I called him and said, hey, it sounds like everybody's going to take some sort of a hit to their margins tomorrow, right? Should we sell anything and cash out and just stay in cash? I said that the day before, but I stuck in and it came back out, right? And I would have been right. The funny thing is I called him, months before, and a day before something major was going to happen, and he's like, "I didn't pull out, market shot up," and I thought it was going to go down. So it's a
crapshoot. In many cases, it's a crapshoot. Now, I've been lucky. I've had two wealth advisors, one of whom, I think it was post-COVID. There was at one point when clearly the market was about to slide. I forget what year it was, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. At that point, he had, for some reason, he had switched accounts from like Fidelity to I don't know. And so we had put everything in cash for the time being. He kept it in cash and the market went south. And that was great. But boy, what a luck. And he did the right thing. My wealth manager I have now said, look, I can give you 100 reasons why you should not sell anything now. But the main one is this too will pass. It has to. Hundreds of years of experience that we know about and have analyzed says this will be only a short-term correction. And at least right now, it's proven to be true. So I made no changes to my stock portfolio. So that's an example of not taking action when a lot of people might have taken the wrong action. When I heard one person say, well, I sold all my portfolio off when the market went down, I went, oh my God, you just lost yourself, I don't know how much money, but you're not going to recoup that unless you manage to find the bottom, but you should never time the market. But yeah, sometimes it's better not to do anything.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Tony. I certainly have learned a lot. This is one of those great topics. And I hope our listeners did too. And those of you who are watching the recorded video, hopefully you got to watch enough of it to take something home with you. I think there were a lot of things we talked about. Tony, is there anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
Yeah. Anybody has any questions or wants to think about something 2 or 3 days later, a week later, just hit me up on LinkedIn. Send me a message,
That's a good idea.
request, and I'm more than happy to help or give you some thoughts and ideas.
And you have your website there next to your name.
Lots of resources on there. Free tools. There's lots of things in there. Yeah.
And I have a YouTube channel. Everything is branded with my name because I can never remember names of companies, but I can remember people's names. So I branded everything John Frederick Firth or John F. Firth, which is my URL, johnffirth.com. And there's a call to action there, also on my LinkedIn profile, to book a free consultation, which I'm happy to do. And I have very interesting conversations when people do that. So thank you, Tony. And thank you, audience and viewers, for engaging with us. And hopefully I'll see you at another LinkedIn Live soon. Bye.
Great. Have a great day.